Hello everybody. So the BMW M2 competition then. I'll be totally honest, this is one of those reviews that I feel the need to do rather than the desire. It would appear that the M2 comp has taken over from the M140i as the default car of choice for everyone, apparently. Every single day I see a new YouTube video or Instagram story from somebody proclaiming that they have bought an M2 comp. And I'll be honest, I don't know why. I'm sure it's wonderful and brilliant, and in the next 15 minutes I'm going to find that out. But there are so many of them out there, if you want to stand out, which I often do, this is definitely not the car to buy. Now the 140i I could forgive very much because it's a nice practical hatchback with some very unique attributes. A straight 6 and rear wheel drive isn't the sort of thing that's very easy to find in that market segment, and it never really has been. They were also offered out at absolutely ludicrous prices. People like TRL down at Bury BMW Heathrow were doing absolutely cracking deals on them, and frankly I couldn't blame anyone that had one. It's the sort of car that you'd expect someone to turn up with because they hadn't gone out to buy a car, but they saw a deal quite so good they just couldn't turn it down. You know, like when mum comes back from the supermarket with an industrial vat of olive oil. Not because you were running out, but it was a good deal. It seems now like the M140i may actually have been something of a gateway drug into full-fat M-car ownership, because a lot of people that have bought into these have formerly had the 140, including this car's very kind owner, Tristan. He didn't spec this car from new, but it's in what seems to be the definitive M2 comp spec. The DCT gearbox and this Hockenheim silver. Being a 2 Series, one of the most disappointing aspects is the fact that you can't do the BMW individual program. So if you want to be special and get one of these, you're going to have to be special just like everybody else. It's better than Nardo Grey, I suppose, but I just don't see a place for the colour silver in the world of exciting cars. Unless it's an AMG GT, a 300 SL or an XJ220, silver is just not a colour that ever excites me. But that's my personal preference. This is really still very much a car that should be able to do the daily thing. And that's why for this first portion of the review I'm driving it in normal, sensible, ordinary mode. It doesn't have adaptive dampers. You do have some settings here for the throttle and I believe for the steering as well, and that's about it. So it's nowhere near as configurable as, say, the full-on M3 or M4. It's actually not too badly damped either. This still has passive dampers on it. Adaptive, I don't think, are even an option. And in comparison to the E92 M3 that I drove not too long ago, I'd say this rides a little bit better. The old M2 was considered by many not quite a proper M car because it didn't have, in their words, a proper M engine in it. This one does. It is the S55, pretty much as you would find it in an M3. Now, of course, because it's a 2, not a 3, they've had to downgrade it a little bit to about 410 horsepower. They've also smoothed out the torque characteristics a little bit in an effort to try and tame the very spiky nature that some of those early M cars were known for. And frankly, it seems to have worked. I'm not experiencing any issues with this car as it is, but I haven't started to press on yet. This is also one of the very few cars where I'm potentially thankful for modern exhaust regulations, because the S55, as effective as it was, always sounded utterly and completely ghastly. There is no way whatsoever of making an S55 sound nice. All you can do is make it sound loud. That's it. And it's not a nice noise at all. At a starting price of just over £50,000, the M2 competition is now playing with a very, very different set of competitors. For that kind of money, you could buy into something, either new or used, quite a bit more special than what you could look at if you were, say, considering the old M140i. And let's be perfectly honest here, if what you're after is simply effective, brisk, comfortable, roomy, practical daily transportation, there are many other better cars for the same money. A 540i Estate as an example. One of my all-time favourites, the Kia Stinger, even absolutely brand spanking new, comes in at something like £10,000 less than one of these. And granted, is not quite as quick, but is extremely fun to drive and has a features list that will make an S-Class blush. There is a word that this car's owner has used to describe the driving experience, and it's a word that I haven't been able to apply to a BMW for quite some time. That word is special. To justify this car's place in the automotive landscape, this car hasn't just got to impress me with its speed on this road, because I know it's going to be quick. It has to excite me, and it's going to be a tough one. So, does it succeed? Let's find out. To do so, we're going to put this car straight into the M2 mode. It's another thing this car gained over the old M2. It's now got modes you can preset, just like in a real M car. A lot to like about the M2 Comp. The engine does seem the best I've really experienced the S55. Reining it in seems to improve it dramatically. It does what you tell it to, and it doesn't really seem to want to send you sideways like the M3 and 4 did, especially in their original incarnations. The brakes, here the standard items. There's a couple of upgrades you can go for first, bigger calipers for the steels and then ceramics. They work great. Responsive, nice, apparently not quite good enough for track, but they're perfectly good enough for road. The steering has a decent weighting to it. The ride is pretty nice. These seats are great, really figure hugging. They're lifted straight out of the M4 Comp. Grip on a reasonably dry day, not an issue. The M limited slip differential at the back does its job nicely, and you do feel, unlike some other M cars, in control. But there is, for me, one really big problem. It is this steering. It's reminding me of the Maserati 3200 that I drove recently. There is a delay, a disconnect in this car. Ordinarily, you'd expect it to be in the engine department. But that's actually okay. It's got turbo lag, but no more or less than I would expect from any other car of this type. But there's a real lag, I guess it is, in the steering. And it does kind of get in the way of things. You learn to work with it, especially when you know the road. You can telegraph your instructions ahead of time, but it just doesn't feel that intuitive. I mean, here, look. I can turn the car and center it before it actually does anything. It's very, very strange that. I don't know where that's coming from. Perhaps the front end softness is responsible a little bit, but for a sporty, darty car that's kind of compact like this, I really would expect a level of agility from it. And it's capable of going around the bends. Absolutely. I didn't expect that at all. Of all things, I rarely even notice that in a car. It's generally not an issue, but here it really is. You feel the whole thing kind of stop, load up, then dig in and move. Very old-fashioned. Probably why Chris Harris likes it, to be fair. And you can certainly drive around it. There's no issues with that, but it's just not what I expect from a car of this kind. Now, that being said, of course, this is exactly the sort of car which is ripe for modification, customization, and personalization. All of the shins. And I've no doubt whatsoever there are plenty of companies who could sort that out for you nicely and easily. I wouldn't give this car any more power. I just wouldn't. I would leave the drivetrain alone. The gearbox is great. BMW get the DCT boxes, and in fairness, their auto boxes as well, absolutely bang on. This is also a car that I find is a little bit easier to place on the road than an M4. In those, you just sit a little bit too low. Now, of course, I can level some other criticisms at this car as well. Now, the interior in here for a 50-odd thousand pound car is all right. It's better than the Audi RS3 that I reviewed a couple of years ago, which had far too much nasty, scratchy plastic. In here, they've made some effort. You've got the little tricolour stitching here on the wheel. You've got some little bits of carbon-ish, very lumpy carbon, very odd, never really had that in a car before. And these bits of vinyl trim here, they're nice enough. You got a dark cloth headlining, got Harman Kardon stereo, the seats do look good, a little bit of coloured stitching on the seatbelts as well as a nice touch. You've also got the proper big carbon strut brace up front as you get with an M3 or an M4, and even though I've been looking at those for years, it never gets old. That is a simply staggering piece of engineering. That is serious automotive pornography. The boot is a good enough size, of course it would be, it's shared with the M2. There is a reasonable amount of space in the back as well, should you want to put passengers in there, and you could even get adults in it, should you choose to. Although I've spoken about this car in terms of its RRP and list price, you and I both know that pretty much nobody is going to buy one of these cars cash, and I've seen some already crazy deals for them. Figures like £500 down, £500 a month are not unattainable, especially if you're willing to be flexible with your specification. You could say from the front end in particular, the car is maybe a little bit over-styled, but it kind of works with the whole sort of short bulldog kind of angry hench looking thing that BMW have gone for with this car. In many ways it is a perfect introduction to full proper M car ownership. As for most of the other boring bits in the car, nav, aircon, all that jazz, it's the same as you'll find really in any other well specified 2 Series, which is to say, pretty decent. And for a back road blast, it's probably a better car than an M5, which would simply dwarf the roads that I like. Particularly if you are coming from another hot hatchback, perhaps a Focus ST or a Fiesta ST or that sort of thing. This is probably going to deliver you all of the things that you want from a proper Beamer. On the practical side, these cars seem to be reasonably reliable. This one's certainly been good to its owner in the months that he's had it. One small thing to note is that if you are buying one from new, you do have to go through a running-in service at around 1,000 miles, and BMW will expect you to pay for that, which I don't think is right. They are also, if you're intending on buying one and running it as a daily, quite thirsty, so bear that in mind. The M2 Comp, it's fast, it's comfier than I expected it might be, but from my perspective, it's far too common to feel special, and that steering is just an odd flaw that, as standard, I cannot forgive. It's far from a bad car, but it's not one I'm particularly in love with. Anyway, there we have it. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all for the next one. Bye-bye.